right now, hit the subscribe button on your YouTube channel, all right? And also hit the notifications button. That way you know each and every time we release some content. Subscribe, help our viewership grow, and be part of a community. Dr. Rob, usually we spend the first 10, 15 minutes of the podcast talking about family stuff, personal life, what we did during the week. I'm going to get right to the chase because there's so much to get to. I thought about you yesterday. I texted you before the game even started, and I thought of you right away because Nebraska came out in the all-whites, and I know how much you love the all-whites. Yes, we're going to start with uniforms, folks, because, Rob, if you've been a listener of this podcast for the last 10 years, and yes, we're one of the longest podcasts to be around, if you did not know that, for 10 years, even going back to when we did Sound Off on KMTV, you were anti-all-white uniforms.
Oh, my God, surrender colors. It's the surrender flag. I mean, I can't stand it. I mean, and I blame this one on Damon Benning. I put this one out there on Twitter when he and Sharp were talking about it before the game. Sharp asked him, he was like, "Hey, what do you think of the all white uniforms?" And first thing Damon said was, "He goes, I like the all whites." I'm like, no, this is not a good thing.
Note to Matt Rhule. You're a good dude. You are. I know you're a Penn State guy, and you were at Penn State, and the all whites are a part of the Penn State culture and uniform get up.
This is not Happy Valley.
This is not Happy Valley. Do not ever let your team wear all whites again. Ever. You scrap it from the wardrobe.
Iowa State 92 is a real thing. I mean, we did the all whites. We did I know at least once. You know what? I think we did it in the Citrus Bowl game where we got just absolutely smoked by Georgia Tech. That was the year Georgia Tech and Colorado tied for the national title. That was fifth down year for Colorado. And then that next year, I think we did it at Washington, lost. Did it at Iowa State. I think we needed some absolute heroics from Tommy Frazier in his first start at quarterback for Nebraska against Missouri that year to pull out a win against Missouri in the all whites. But yeah, after the Iowa State game, we tanked them, and everybody on the team was basically like, all right, we should really never, ever do this again. I don't know what it is. The jinx is real. The curse is real. They should not ever do all whites.
Is that a unity council thing? You come together and say, Coach, don't ever do this again?
Well, I think it was the team that probably brought it to the coach and said, hey, let's do this.
See, they don't have an understanding of history at this point.
No. And here's the other thing. You're not Oregon. I mean, if you're Oregon, fine, go for that. But I mean, it's Penn State, the all white thing. That's their thing. They've done that forever.
Alabama too.
Yeah, Alabama will do it. I've seen Oklahoma do it. I mean, and again, that's schools. They've done it. Nebraska, it's like, hey, let's do something different and put up surrender flags. It's like, no, don't do that.
Now let's not sugarcoat it. The uniforms are not the reason Nebraska lost yesterday. And I'm going to fully admit I was wrong. Last week on the podcast, I said Indiana hadn't played anybody. I thought Nebraska was positioned well, was playing well. Indiana's a really good football
That's
team.
A good team. Now, the other thing I will say is that there's some situations Nebraska got in early. And when you get in, sometimes you get punched in the face a little bit. You get back on your heels a little bit. There's 1,000 terms for it. Sometimes you start pressing. Sometimes you're trying too hard. Sometimes it's playing riskier. I don't know, however you want to phrase it, but it does change how you play the game, and it does change the strategy a little bit of, we got to play a little catch-up mode here now. And Nebraska had a series of mistakes in this game. And it's the same fucking stuff that we've been talking about for several years, whether it's been Mike Riley or Scott Frost or Matt Rhule. It's some of the same shit that's coming back to haunt them. And it's special teams miscues. When Ja'Cory Barney, and I get it, he's a freshman. He's got to be smart about this. Don't catch the ball on the 1 yard line and get just enough off balance that you step out of bounds on the 1 yard line.
Yeah, that was on the first kickoff, right?
Yeah, literally right at the start. You're down a touchdown. You're getting the ball back. Well, guess what? Now you got to go 99 yards. Not a good look right there. There's mistake number one, where all of a sudden now you're sitting there going, and as a player, you're sitting there going, okay, we got to figure out how to have a short memory here, because if a good team will make mistakes and then you blank and forget about them. You throw it away. You keep moving, doing your thing. If you're a team with a lot of young players, Nebraska's got a lot of young players. If you're a team that doesn't have a lot of experience winning consistently, Nebraska's not a team that wins consistently. Little mistakes like that they get stuck in your head. You're thinking about them. You start thinking more, man, we really got to, you kind of tighten up and worry about things a bit. And you could just see that happening to this team. All of a sudden they're now worried about, okay, well, God, are we going to get a punt blocked again? What about the punt returns? Man, we're going to make sure we field that right. You start overthinking everything, and then you see more mistakes. The next big one I thought was when they had the fumble going into the end zone. I mean, I thought it was a fourth down play, and Dowdell got hit. He would have had the first down if he'd held on to the ball, but got hit, fumbled, ball bounces backwards, and series is over. That should have been a touchdown drive. Now, if Nebraska scores on that drive, end of the first quarter, it's a 14-14 game. And all of a sudden, it's all right, guess what? We got a dogfight here. Both teams need to buckle down. Indiana maybe changes a little about how they're thinking about things. Nebraska's thinking a little bit differently about how they would be doing things in a 14-14 game. If it's 14-14, Nebraska's going to sit there and just, hey, we're okay. We're going to kind of bide our time. We're going to play our game plan. When you're down 14-0 and Indiana's just gotten the ball back on a turnover, now you've got some issues, because what's going to happen is on defense, Indiana's going to pin their ears back and come after you like nobody's business. And they did. They played very aggressive defense very early. And they played a very aggressive offense very early as well, too. I mean, they went for it on fourth down was that their first drive?
It was on the very first drive. They connected. You can see it on the Doc's diagnosis presented by Central Florida Credit Union.
And it was like a 4th and 2.
Yeah, it was 4th and 2. They opted not to kick the field goal. They went for it, picked up the first down, led to the first touchdown. On that same drive, it was 3rd and 1. They did a kind of a toss sweep to the weak side of the field.
Great cutback by the back on that play.
So there's a lot of things to dissect here, and there's a lot of blame to go around. I'm going to start first with coaching. That was an ill-prepared team, and they were out-coached. Defensively, offensively, head coach, special teams, you name it. Nebraska had a week off and went to Bloomington and was out-coached at every phase of the game.
Well, and 90% of what happens from a coaching standpoint happens during the week, during the prep leading up to it.
There looked like there was no prep.
Well, do you remember last week during the podcast, you asked me what I thought about having bye weeks. And I've always said I do not like bye weeks, because as a player, you always felt like if you were in a little bit of a rhythm, you lose that rhythm. It's kind of weird to go 2 weeks without playing a game once the season started. About the only time that I was ever halfway comfortable with it was bowl games. And even then, you'd get out there for the game itself, and you just kind of, once you started playing that bowl game, you just kind of felt like the timing was off. But that's also part of the reason why, if you watch teams that are in divisions or leagues that have a true playoff, which we do now, you generally kind of roll right into the playoffs, and you never lose that rhythm. And that's something that's been interesting to me as I've watched more and more playoff football over the last few years, as you see you don't have that loss of rhythm from a 2-week or 3-week layoff. In this situation, it's 2 weeks long. And the thing that I'd mentioned in the last podcast was, what I worry about is, it's really easy to try and game plan when you're 2 weeks out and get stuck in the wrong game plan. And you can prep for something and you prep and you get it really, really ingrained into the players. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what the game plan is. Here's what we're going to do on both sides of the ball. And it gets so ingrained that sometimes you show up and it's like, ooh, we need to make some adjustments to this game plan. We need to make some adjustments to our preparation. They're not doing exactly what we thought they were going to do. And if you've been prepping for that for 2 weeks, boy, that's a ship that's hard to turn the rudder on sometimes. If it's only been a week of prep, you're sitting there going, okay, well, you know what? This isn't exactly what we thought we were going to see. But we saw something like this 2 weeks ago, and we saw some of these looks 4 weeks ago, and you can kind of make some of these adjustments, I think, a little easier if that preparation hasn't been so incredibly ingrained. And I think that was part of the problem. So when you talk about putting the blame on the coaches, I think a lot of it goes back to just it's the prep and it's the game plan. It's not that they weren't prepared. I think they were prepared to see stuff that Indiana ended up not showing.
The surprising thing to me, and let's be honest, Nebraska fans have PTSD. And yesterday on the socials was the most criticism I've seen of Matt Rhule, being compared to Scott Frost, being compared to Mike Riley. Listen, I understand it's still year 2, but it was bad. I mean, just watching his demeanor on the sideline, he gets flagged for an unsportsmanlike conduct. I mean, it was just all around bad.
It is. Some of that I kind of wonder about in regards to, I don't know, personality clash is the right thing between Rhule and Cignetti. Whatever it is, those two guys, I don't think they like each other. And I don't know when their paths would have crossed or if it's just Cignetti's kind of this. I mean,
he's arrogant.
He's incredibly arrogant. Yeah, exactly. You had the Google him comment. There was, I didn't see him actually say it, but I saw several people reference it after the game. A reporter had asked him, hey, who's your mentor, or who do you view as a mentor, as a coach? And he kind of shrugs and says, well, me.
I mean, the guy does not lack self-confidence at all.
There is zero lack of confidence there. And I mean, it's not like listening to a Deion Sanders spiel. It's a little different. And the other thing is, and I said this to some people, I would be interested to talk to people who have played for Cignetti. Let me find some James Madison guys that he's coached over the years. He was at Alabama as well, too, for a while, isn't it?
He was a recruiting coordinator at Alabama.
And so I'd like to talk to some of these guys who played at Alabama that know him. I'd love to talk to some James Madison guys, because it's what I'm seeing in interviews, things like that. From a productivity standpoint, I'm not seeing it's almost the opposite, because usually these super arrogant guys, you don't see long-term success with guys like that.
He's had long-term success.
He had everywhere he's right though. Everywhere he goes, he wins.
And I think for the most part, he was at James Madison a good point, a good number of years. He was at Elon. He was at Indiana Purdue University. I mean, the guy just wins.
He's very consistent in what he does. I'm not sure I have a major problem with him talking the talk, just because
he backs it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he really does.
And this is a put together team. You're talking about an Indiana team that's starting more transfer portal guys than anybody else in the country. I think 18 transfer portal guys.
And it's interesting because it's all James Madison guys. I think Asbury, who had the big hit on Ja'Cory Barney on that jet sweep for the big loss. He's an old Dominion guy.
Rourke's from Ohio.
Yeah.
He was a Bobcat. So, just flat out coached. And
you made the point. He's finding these diamonds in the rough at FCS and MAC schools and bringing them in, and they're just, boy, they look good. I mean, it didn't look like, it's not like when Nebraska played Georgia Southern and got beat in Lincoln. That looked like an FCS team that was just outplaying a Power 5 team. This looked like a high-level Power 5 team beating the crap out of a doormat Power 5 team. Is what it looked like. This didn't look like FCS guys playing against Power 5 guys and just outplaying them and having a great day. This looked like future NFL guys out, like a roster of NFL guys outplaying a doormat team.
Last week, a lot of Nebraska fans were upset that Nebraska was not ranked in the top 25. Couldn't understand how a 5-1 Nebraska team could not be ranked in the top 25. You don't deserve to be ranked. Yeah, I mean, and there was a reason that Nebraska was not in the top 25. It was getting votes, but everybody's like, well, how come this team's there? How come that team's there? Listen, you just got beat down. And you didn't look prepared. You didn't look like you could respond to. I think that the hardest, and you brought it up, it's tough to watch any team that's supposed to be good, supposed to be growing, not respond to adversity. That's what, and you brought it.
That was tough to watch.
Yeah, and even, I forget who it was, a defensive player said, when they got smacked in the face, they get down. You can't, this is like, Biden blaming Trump, and I'm not bringing for everything. You can't blame the past regime. You can only do it for so long. You have a period of time where you can go, well, I inherited this. This roster has been pretty much turned over, and a culture has been established. That team got smacked in the face and did not respond. In fact, they quit.
God, I hate saying it, but yeah, there was zero response to it, and it was game long. I mean, they kept sitting there, just standing there, taking the punch. That was tough to watch. From an emotional standpoint, that was a difficult game. That's going to be a tough one for. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, it's like, we got Ohio State next.
Well,
it's like I'm sitting here going, like, this is going to be a tough game to have to recover from a mental and emotional standpoint. And I'm like, that was my out of the frying pan into the fire comment that you're going to hear about in the diagnosis, is that it's like they're jumping from a team that we thought we were going to be able to at least hang with, and we just got stomped. And now we got Ohio State.
I forgot to bring the sheet in. It's sitting on my desk right now, and I forgot to bring it in. But I went through the Frost era. I went through the Riley era. I went through the Callahan era. I went through the Pelini era, and tried to point out some really, really bad losses in Nebraska history. Because I looked at this one and said, where does this rank? Worst when we posted the report card yesterday, and I said, worst loss since when? And
we had some good answers.
But I can make an argument that it's worse than one of the Ohio State losses, because Ohio State was right around 1 or 2 in the country.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about an Indiana team that hadn't played anybody of significance.
Well, guess what we get next week?
You get Ohio State next week.
When they're right around 1 or 2 in the country.
The ones I would have to agree upon were, you'd have to go back to the Callahan era when they got beat at Texas Tech.
The Kansas game.
The Kansas beat down. And some people went all the way back to the last game Frank Solich coached, which was the Colorado game where they got ran all over. Because
that one was brutal.
But I would say,
I mean, Pelini had the couple of those Wisconsin games were just god awful.
The Big Ten title game, right?
Yeah.
Where
Melvin Gordon's still running.
Yeah, I think he just scored again.
He's almost caught up with Marv Seiler.
But I'm going to say this, because it's going to be different for everybody. I will say, in my lifetime, in my time covering Nebraska football, this is one of the top 5 worst losses in Nebraska history in my lifetime. I'm 54 years old.
Ooh.
This is one of the top 5.
I'd say top 10. Do you know where this game ranks in my mind?
Where?
So this was so thinking back, do you remember, in my opinion, I don't know what your thoughts are, the game that ended Callahan's tenure in Lincoln?
The Oklahoma State game.
The Oklahoma State game. You knew exactly where I was going with that
and he did not prepare me for that. The reason I remember that game vividly in my mind, I'm up in the press box. I'm in the crow's nest with my photographer, and that's when in the south end zone, the Fire Peterson banner came came on board.
Ooh.
And the next day and the next 2 days, Steve Peterson was fired right after that game. And Tom Osborne came in as the interim at that point, and you knew it was all over at that point. You just knew there was nothing he was going to be able to do to save his job.
But that was the game. And the thing that was interesting about that game, there's a couple of things. Was number one was how upset the fans were, because that was one of the first times that basically at halftime, early third quarter, everybody just got up and left.
They'd seen enough.
Yeah, they got up and left. And I remember a reporter after the game stopped a Nebraska, not after the game. Game was still going on. I remember a reporter stopped and asked a fan there, who was leaving the stadium, their thoughts. And the fan had a comment along the lines of, you've got all these players who are coming here to play at Nebraska, but not for Nebraska. That's why I'm leaving. That hit hard. Now, the thing that hit harder about that game that really made it stick in my head, and I remember we were doing the diagnosis on sound at the time. That was the game where you could literally see Nebraska football players pulling up to avoid hits. And this is like defensive guys. You could see offensive guys pulling up and almost like specifically not making a block. You saw defenders not putting a hit on guys, just letting guys run past them. They basically just stopped playing. They quit. And that is a harsh word to use. I don't want to say Nebraska, but I saw that same level of quit, but it's all of a sudden, it's like they just dialed back the intensity. It's like, well, we're going to kind of go through the motions and hope we can like stop the bleeding, but the
knife was inserted and you're supposed to leave the knife in. They took it out and it gutted them, right?
Yeah, I mean, they turnover after, and that was the other thing. I mean, I mentioned the step out by Ja'Cory Barney on that opening kickoff return on their first drive. I mentioned Dowdell's fumble, but that stuff kept going. I mean, the interceptions, those were, so Raiola's first two picks that he threw this year, I thought they were great throws. The defender just made an outstanding play against the receiver to strip the ball out of the guy's hands and get the pick. His third pick was the one against Rutgers. And that was kind of a bad one. It was just, he did not recognize the coverage, wasn't expecting that guy to just be sitting lurking in that spot when he threw the ball. I expected to not see the type of interceptions I saw on Saturday. Those were Rutgers level ones where it's, wow, there was just a complete lack of recognition of where those defenders were going to be in regards to where you threw it. And here's the other thing, and this is a little bit of a freshman thing. This is a little bit of the whole letting a kid be too much Patrick Mahomes and throwing off of that back leg too much. There's some technique things he's going to have to brush up on a little bit here if he wants to avoid interceptions like this in the future. There's some learning curve stuff in terms of learning what a defense is capable of doing in regards to disguising coverage, and in terms of how Indiana used a zone defense to cause those interceptions to happen. Now, those were takeaways. I mean, the throws were maybe not great, but they were takeaways. But as a quarterback, you got to understand in a zone defense where these danger spots are and where that extra guy is going to be in regards to being able to make those interceptions. And that's not a learning step that Raiola made between the Rutgers game and in the Indiana game.
Did Rhule keep Raiola in the game too long yesterday? I put this out there. I said he needs to get him out or he's going to get him killed.
I mean, I understand that. Part of me is sitting there going, okay, let me ask you this.
Okay.
Who's the best quarterback on Nebraska's roster?
Dylan Raiola.
Done. There's your answer. You keep the guy who's your best quarterback in the game to try and do as well as you can in the game. And I understand the game's out of reach at that point, but you keep trying at least.
And he kept making mistakes.
On the flip side, let's say it's a loss and you keep making mistakes. Well, guess what? Now you got film to go back and look at. And if you didn't have an understanding of what you were doing wrong, guess what? Now you got more teaching examples of what you did wrong. So I'm not sure I got a major problem with it. If I was a coach, am I going to say, okay, enough's enough, we're going to put somebody else in? It's not like Harburg came in and immediately there was a flip switch and we had a great drive and maybe we should have put Harburg in earlier. They continued tanking no matter who was at quarterback. And I think the coaches maybe recognized that. But the first question's the bigger one. Who's your best quarterback? Well, it is Raiola. So,
but we are getting to a point in the season, Rob, where you can only use the freshman excuse. I expected the freshman game to come in one of those first 2 or 3 games. I
don't buy that.
Okay.
So here's my thing. You're only a freshman for so long. Yeah, no bullshit. You're a freshman when you're a freshman. I mean, then the opposite argument has to be true. Like you can't sit there and go, okay, hey, you've got this 5th-year senior quarterback. He shouldn't make mistakes. Well, then every senior quarterback ought to be perfect. I mean, everybody sits there and goes, okay, well, he's not a freshman after X number of games. Well, would you rather have a Dylan Raiola in year 2 or year 3, or do you want Dylan Raiola in year 1? Well, I'll tell you right now, I hope he doesn't transfer, and I hope we've got Dylan Raiola in year 3 because I do think he's going to be really, really good. And I think a second or third year Dylan Raiola is going to be way better than a first year Dylan Raiola because it doesn't matter if it's game 3 or game 5 or game 7. You're going to have some freshman moments, and those freshman moments are going to be there all year long. Now, you'd like to see less of those freshman moments as the season's gone along, and we've seen more of them here in a couple of these games. But those freshman moments, especially on Saturday, came against a really, really good football team. I mean, I'm looking at their schedule. Ohio State's really the only team I look at on the rest of their schedule that I go, okay, here's the one team that can beat them. And it's Ohio State, in my opinion. And I'm not even completely sold that Indiana can't beat Ohio State. I think they can.
I think that's going to be a better game than most people think.
Yeah. But if they lose to just Ohio State, that's an 11-1 season. That's a damn good team.
We're going to talk more about the offense in just a second, but I want to remind you, if you're looking for a new pair of shoes, we want you to wear G-Defies. I'm wearing G-Defies.
Don't know if I can get my leg up that high.
Dr. Rob's wearing G-Defies. In fact, I got an email earlier this week from a guy who said he's going to walk to Holy Ghost because you're going to be speaking at the Holy Ghost Husker night. And it's funny, people thought you were a realtor. I don't know if you saw that. Our buddy Kelly saw the Holy Ghost sign. They put it on like a real estate sign.
I've seen the sign. It's got my name.
It says Dr. Rob Zatechka at the bottom, and it does look like you're the real estate agent.
It's my side hustle.
But he's like, podcast. He's like, I'm going to either walk to Holy Ghost and punch you in the mouth because he doesn't like the shoes, or he's going to give you a big hug because he likes the shoes. I promise you're going to like the shoes, right? And I've been wearing mine for almost 6-7 months now. So have you. Dr. Rob's got an extra. We got an email.
Have you switched out the insoles? Because when they send you the shoes,
they send you new insoles too.
They send you an additional set of insoles to put. I'm still on my first insole.
And didn't you get an email from a family friend earlier this week that said, hey, what are the shoes again?
Yeah.
And where do I get them? So people are discovering G-Defy shoes, and we want you to, and we want to save you a little bit of money. So, and I screwed up the promo code last week. If you go to G-Defy, that's GDEFY, or gravitydefier.com, a lot of different makes of shoes on there. You got walking shoes, you got running shoes, you've got dress shoes, you've got work shoes, you've got sandals. You can pick whatever you want, and on an order of $100 or more, use the promo code DocTalk20. That's DocTalk20, and you're going to save $20 off your order. So use the promo code DocTalk20 when you order your G-Defy shoes. Again, a 60-day return policy. If you try them out, don't like them, you can send them back, but we're pretty confident you're going to like them. And just take care of your feet and alleviate the pain that you may have. And the older you get, guess what? You start feeling that pain. You know, you can always email us, doctalksports@gmail.com. That's doctalksports@gmail.com. Got a lot of emails last night after the game, Dr. Rob, saying what Nebraska needs to do. From, they need to run the football more. They need to do this more. Guess what? You can say this is what they should do. They can't run the football. They couldn't run the football yesterday. You can say you can run more.
70 yards total rushing. Half of those yards were from Harburg.
On the Wildcat and a couple scrambles?
Yeah. I mean, literally half their rushing yards, 32. I mean, not fully half, but 32 out of 70 yards were Heinrich Harburg on 5 carries.
Yeah. So you can say all you want that they should do this. We know that in a perfect world, but when you can't do it, and Nebraska hasn't been a great running team all year anyway.
They've been very mediocre.
And by the way, you brought it up. If Rhule doesn't transfer, he didn't come here to hand the fucking football off.
No,
he came here to throw the football.
Yeah, they're gonna be a passing offense with him. And I know some people had commented on, well, God, we need him to just take off and run more and be that running threat. It's not going to happen. Get used to that right now. It hasn't happened this season for a reason. Again, I'm going to go back and tell you, go back and look at Rhule's high school stats. It's a quick Google. He was basically a 30 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and about 180 yards rushing a season. Like he would average like 10 to 20 yards rushing per game. That's all you're going to get out of him. And here's the thing. The coaches didn't bring him here to rush either. He didn't come here to run the ball. The coaches didn't bring him here to run the ball.
No, he's going to pass. Now, he needs some better wide receivers that can make great plays. Indiana's wide receivers in one-on-one coverage made some amazing catches. When you go against Ohio State this weekend, Ohio State receivers are super athletic, and they can go up and make one-hand grabs. They can make catches all over the place. Nebraska does not have that. Dowdell is a good running back. He's not a great running back. And the offensive line is young. It's okay, but there's still some problems there.
And it's a little bit patchwork. I mean, you look at trying to get, I think Evans has been doing well. Latowski's been doing well, but there's been movement in terms of who you've had in there. Ben Scott's been, I still think Scott's been very stable at that center position. You've had a rotation at left tackle. I think Gatula's still continuing to develop. But again, keep in mind, he's only a redshirt freshman also. So it's not like you've got this seasoned offensive line out there. I still feel like Ben Hart was a better player last year. I'm not sure what happened between last year and this year, but there's literally a step backwards there with him. And so it's just, it's the lines blocking has not been crisp. It's not as aggressive as you'd like to think. And they just don't have that nastiness where you're seeing guys really trying to finish dudes off.
So we talk about Nebraska's offense. It's going to be a passing offense. Indiana was running the RPO a lot, and it was effective because you didn't know if they were going to run the football, which they went for over 200 yards. You didn't know if they were going to pass the football, which they went for well over 200 yards. Nebraska did not know what was coming at them. We show the jet sweep on the diagnosis, and Indiana knew exactly the play Nebraska was going to play.
Well, and that's, and this is when we talked earlier in the podcast about Nebraska, where sometimes game planning is off. You can watch all the film you want on an opponent, and they're still going to show up and do something a little different than what you thought they were going to do. I'll say this: Iowa State in 1992, that game was really probably about 75% all in our own heads. About 25% of that game was we got out there on offense and we're looking at their defensive alignments. They showed a slightly different look than what they had done most of the year. And it was kind of difficult to tell who was who from a position standpoint.
But the difference between that is, you were looking past Iowa State. Let's just call it a spade a spade.
Well, that's why I said 75% of it was all in our heads. But that's the 75%.
Nebraska should not have been looking past Indiana.
No, and I don't think they were, although I think we talked about that in the podcast as well, too, is that they can't afford to look past you can't look past Rutgers. You can't look past Purdue. And I really don't think Nebraska was looking past Indiana. I think it's just Indiana came out and showed an ever so slightly different look than what Nebraska was expecting. I do not think Nebraska remotely expected the running attack that Indiana showed. That's the first time I've seen Indiana do that this year. I haven't watched all their games, but what I have seen, they've got almost zero reliance on the run game.
Okay, let's transition into the defense. And by the way, you put your report card out right before the game is even over. You gave Fs down the board, which was
they moved at will.
They moved at will. By the way, the report card got over 100,000 views on Twitter. It's by far one of the most viewed pieces of content we put out. And we do it kind of sarcastically. We kind of have fun with it.
Yeah.
But the report card.
There's been F minuses that have popped up on there before.
But, that big
or
bad
F plus. I had an F plus.
That big bad Nebraska defense was pathetic and hadn't given up a rushing touchdown heading into the Indiana game. And I don't have the stats in front of me, but I believe they gave 5 rushing touchdowns.
I believe you are
Hoosiers.
Correct. I can pull
5 rushing touchdowns. Rob, there were big gaps, and Tony White's a hell of a defensive coordinator. I'll give him that. But
doesn't mean you're perfect.
No, so. And not even close. And what surprised you more yesterday?
Yeah, 5 rushing touchdowns.
What surprised you more, the poor offensive performance or the poor defensive performance? Because it was bad.
A big old sigh there. The
I know.
Microphone just picked up. So this is okay. So go back to the Illinois game.
Yeah. By the way, Illinois beat Michigan yesterday. Illinois.
I love the throwback uniform.
Yeah, they had the old red Grange helmets.
I know a lot of people hated those. I thought those were cool. That's one of the alternate uniforms I like is when people do the throwbacks. But so you go back to the Illinois game. Was not a particularly good game by Nebraska on offense or defense in that game. This was like Illinois 2.0. I mean, it was everything Illinois did. Illinois, it seemed like they ran the ball fairly consistently. It seemed like they converted third downs fairly consistently. It seemed like Illinois' defense had a really solid day beating Nebraska. Indiana didn't actually. If you look at their third down efficiency, they were 5 of 9. They didn't have to be because they were getting first downs.
Was there just one second? Did they just punt
play
once yesterday? I think Indiana just punted once.
I'd have to take a look at that. It might have been. Boy, that's brutal.
And it came like in the third quarter. The punter finally came out. And you're like, oh wow, Indiana's punting.
Rushing, receiver, fumbles, defense, interceptions.
Rob just scrolling through the stats as we move along.
One punt, 32 yards.
One punt.
That's brutal.
So
they either scored, turned it over, which I thought Nebraska had. They had the one intercept. Rourke had the one interception.
But their offense was fun to watch. Rourke, but let's not forget, Rourke didn't even play in the second half. His thumb got hurt.
Yeah.
And he didn't even play in the second half. And it's not like Indiana slowed down without him.
Taven Jackson came in and was 7 of 8 for 2 TDs.
Yes.
It's like Rourke, he threw more touchdown passes than Rourke did.
They couldn't stop anything.
No, it's that I'm probably going to say defense was the more disappointing. And I think the only reason I say that is because at times, so I'm going back up to the team stats here. 7 of 16 on third downs. I mean, it's less than 50%, so it's not great.
What's the time of possession? What was the time of possession? I forget what the time of
Nebraska was 32 to 28.
All that says is that Indiana's moving the ball fast and at will.
Yeah. So Nebraska had the time of possession. Now, but what that also means is that Nebraska was moving the ball a bit. So they had 3 interceptions, 2 fumbles lost. So you had 5 turnovers that killed drives. you had 304 yards of total offense, which is not great.
No.
I mean, that's frankly in this day and age.
Did Indiana end up with over 500, or were they right around that 500?
495. Basically, they gave up 500 yards. I'm going to say the defense was more disappointing just because remove the turnovers, and Nebraska does move the ball a bit in this game. It's not great, but they did move the ball a bit. They were in scoring position on a number of series where they turned the ball over. So it's remove those. There's some very mediocre, okay aspects to Nebraska's offense in this game. Majority of it was bad, but there were some aspects that were okay.
I'm going to piss a lot of people off.
The defense just didn't. They never stopped them.
I'm going to make some people mad here. Indiana's a better team up and down. They could play 10 times. Indiana's probably going to win 7 or 8 of the games.
8 or 9.
They
are a good team.
Yes.
I just think the thing that people have trouble wrapping their head around is how can you have a guy year one this good? And I talked about this in the last podcast. The thing that worries me about Cignetti is that he's always won. The whole Google him thing's true. The guy has a great track record everywhere he's been. That worried me, and that was the thing that probably was of biggest concern to me going into this game, is that it was like, well, it's his first year. It's all these James Madison and Old Dominion players. It's how good can they really be? And I'm like, the guy has always won. And that really worried me.
If Matt Rhule really wants to win at Nebraska, and I think he does, when this season's over, he's got to do it. The hard part about being a head coach is you're a CEO. You're running a big organization.
He's got to make some decisions.
He's got to make. Foley's got to go. Satterfield needs to look. They need to look at Satterfield and say, are you the right guy? Tony White may be a head coach somewhere. Yeah. Tony White's the right guy but you have to do an up and down analysis of everybody that's on your coaching staff and go, are you getting the job done? And that's a big question because
it's not happening with Foley. And I feel bad about that because I think,
it's not personal, it's business.
Yeah. I mean, there's guys that I look at where they get fired and I'm just like, I don't care. I mean, here's Kevin Cosgrove. Everybody I know who knows Kevin Cosgrove said he's a great guy.
Yeah, if Bill Callahan would have got rid of Kevin Cosgrove earlier, he might have saved his job.
Yeah, there's things like that he's a great guy. Everybody I know who's interacted with the Foley said amazing human being. And a pretty good recruiter too.
But here's the deal, Rob.
I don't think he's a good coach.
This is Nebraska. You're talking about one of the most storied programs in college football history. There is no reason whatsoever you don't have a kicker. And the fact that Matt Rhule is in scoring positions to where he could at least get 3 points and he goes,
he's got to go for it.
He's got to go for it on fourth down says a lot about where you are as a football program. You don't have a kicker. How does that happen?
Well, the bigger question is why are you in fourth down in scoring position as opposed to scoring?
That's fair.
Get the fucking touchdown.
But you can't even within 30 yards, a 30-yard field goal, you're going, fuck it, we're gonna go for it on fourth down because I don't trust my kicker to go out and make it. That shouldn't happen at any Power 4 school. It just shouldn't happen.
I agree. No, you're right.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think you're going to piss fans off when you say that about the coaching staff because a lot of the comments I saw, the consistent thing I kept seeing that popped up in the comments. By the way, if you follow us on Twitter, we had so many comments. I can't get to them all. I apologize. I got a lot of
There was like 200 on the report card. There were like 262 comments.
I had so many people asking me like, hey, Rob, what do you think about this? Or what's your thoughts on this? I'm going to try to get to a bunch of those questions today. I'm not going to get everybody, and I apologize. Just there was so much after this. But one of the consistent things I did see was people saying, hey, like Sat and Foley got to go. And that's going to be interesting come into the year. So now, because here's the other thing. I look at the rest of Nebraska's schedule, and I know a lot of people are looking at that going like, hey, 5-7 is very real here.
Yes.
I hate saying you can't upset a team. I know a few years ago we had that near miracle upset over Michigan and Lincoln. Could it happen? I mean, yeah, but Ohio State would have to come in here and play very poorly. There'd have to be some game planning issues on Ohio State's side. Nebraska would have to, from a game planning standpoint, would have to hit the nail on the head with everything. And then we would just need to be lucky on a number of plays in order for us to even keep this game close. Now, but there's other teams on this schedule that I think are still winnable. I mean, when you look at Nebraska and you look at who they've got left in the rest of the season. So they got Ohio State, they got UCLA.
By the way, UCLA and that Rutgers win is because Rutgers came to Lincoln, was undefeated at the time. That Rutgers win after yesterday doesn't look as good because Rutgers has now lost 2 in a row, lost at home to UCLA. UCLA, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, or at least we thought. Maybe this team's getting better, but UCLA goes all the way across the country.
We also used to think Michigan State was one of the worst teams.
Yeah, well, we'll get to, but we'll get to that because I want to talk about the bowl game scenario and just the difference between fan bases here. But
I'm also thinking all of a sudden I'm sitting here going like, oh shit, maybe USC's a winnable game, and I didn't think that was when the season. Joel
Klatt on the broadcast yesterday said USC was the best 3-3 team in the country. USC again had
now they're 3-4.
They're 3-4 now. USC again had a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter, and Lincoln Riley just cannot keep that team together. And even on the last drive, had a chance to get within field goal range and couldn't convert. And you're right. I think USC is
Wisconsin's a worry. Iowa's gonna, even after the Michigan State game, Iowa's still one of those teams I look at that I'm worried.
It'd be interesting to see how Iowa responds to that. And this is where I was going to go. So I hosted the Iowa Hawkeye call-in show last night for 3 hours, and it was 6 calls deep. But we only have 6 lines from 11 o'clock at night till 2 o'clock in the morning. And here's the difference between the fan bases. Is that Nebraska just wants to become bowl eligible right now, right? They just like, you got to get to the postseason.
Just get us one more.
Just get to bowl eligibility. Iowa fans have now thrown in the white flag because they're like, what are we playing for? Because they've been going to bowl games every single year.
That's kind of a change in mentality.
It's a change in mentality because this team was supposed to be, on paper before the season, a 10-2 team, maybe an 11-1 team if you beat Iowa State. Now, Iowa State is 7-0 in the driver's seat in the Big 12 for a playoff. But Iowa fans are like, they don't want to go to the Outback Bowl. They don't want to go to the some shitty bowl. They're like, what are we playing for? And so
all of a sudden that playoff got expanded.
The bowl games are going to mean less because you can become bowl eligible this year. After that, you just want you want a winning record. It's not about bowl eligibility. It's about having a winning record. You want a winning record or at 500.
You want to be in the playoffs because here's what's going to happen. I think this playoff goes for a couple of years and gets bumped to 16.
I don't disagree with that.
I hope it does. But I mean, it goes to 16. All of a sudden, if you're not in the playoff, it's going to be kind of a letdown year.
100%. So Iowa fans now at 4-3 are going, screw it. This season's over. What are you paying for? Nebraska fans want to get to 500. They want to get to a winning record, but that's going to last maybe 1, maybe 2 years. After that, if you're not in the playoff, it is a disappointing season.
So, well, and that's the thing. I still look at Nebraska right now, and okay. So let's say they come back, they lose to Ohio State, but at least they show up with and they throw some counter punches. That's what I'm hoping for. From a mental and emotional standpoint, I at least want to see them show up, throw some counter punches, and be emotionally involved in the game and be fight. Even if you're getting your butt whooped, it's fourth quarter, you got no chance to win. I want to see guys going out there and just absolutely battling. Go up against UCLA. If you can beat UCLA and then maybe get one more win after that. Going into the year, what did I say?
You said 7.
I said 7. 6 could be a stretch right now. Yeah, you got Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Wisconsin's looking better and better. They're looking more and more solid. I think Luke Fickell he's developing. He's getting those guys to play
Wisconsin's
better.
Progressing. Iowa's regressing. USC, I don't know what USC is.
Well, here's the other thing. I don't know what Nebraska's doing, because we saw that loss against Illinois. And then after that Illinois game, you had 2 wins. They beat Purdue, they beat Rutgers. And all of a sudden you're sitting here going, okay, you know what? They're fighting, they're grinding. I think we're going to be okay here. I really do. And then you saw that Indiana game. And the most disappointing thing to me was that lack of fight. I mean, you said it looked like they quit.
That's a bit harsh, but it might be a bit hyperbole, but you know.
I hate using the Q word, but yeah, they kind of did. And so now you're looking at the rest of the schedule going, okay, well, what do they do against Ohio State? Because I've seen Nebraska quit against Ohio State. I've seen Nebraska quit during warmups against Ohio State.
Here's why Ohio State's not going to look past Nebraska, even though Nebraska got blown out by Indiana. Because we saw Alabama get beat by Tennessee yesterday. Alabama is going to be on the cusp of making the college football playoff. Ohio State lost to Oregon. You lose one more, you get tripped up, and a 2-loss team becomes questionable because you're going to have Oregon there, you're going to have Penn State there, you're going to have some teams that are lined up. And Ohio State's a little bell went off and said, okay, Alabama losing puts Alabama maybe on the outside. Ohio State, even though it didn't drop that far in the loss to Oregon, which was proper because Oregon's going to be the new number 1 team in the country.
And I don't think Tennessee's a good team.
Yes.
That's Heupel's got them playing great football.
Georgia's playing great football right now. Georgia went to Texas and just put a beat down on the Longhorns.
Yeah.
I mean,
I didn't see that one coming. That one surprised.
It doesn't surprise me that Georgia won. The beatdown surprised me.
Yeah, it did. That one caught me off guard. I almost kind of wonder if Texas was looking at Georgia and going, okay, well, they've looked questionable in a couple of games. They got beat by Alabama. We got this. And it's just
you know who's getting better? Texas A&M is getting better.
Yeah.
Texas A&M is a 1-loss team.
I hate to say it. SEC's good.
It's really good.
And it's there. They're mediocre teams. Like they're mediocre teams. It's like Ole Miss. And that's a good football team.
A 2-loss Ole Miss team.
Alabama's a mediocre team
by the way,
in the SEC.
LSU went to Arkansas and put a beat down on the Razorbacks.
All of a sudden, LSU's looking really good.
And this is where the playoffs is changing the dynamic of everything.
Oh, guess what? The regular season games, guess what?
They matter.
They matter.
They matter.
They matter way more than they did when it was just a 4-team playoff.
And you know how Nebraska used to take pride in those 9-win seasons? 9 wins ain't shit. It ain't shit.
9-3, you're going to be a bubble team at best.
At best. You need to get into the playoff. You're going to need 10, 11, or 12 wins.
Yeah. And that's with the expanded 12-team.
Yes.
It's 3 times the size that it was.
It may even be that way when it goes to a 16-team playoff.
Yeah, and I think it will. Which is, again, this is why I've lobbied for several years now. We need to expand the goddamn playoff.
I don't think it will ever be 24 like FCS. Not that I would be opposed to it,
but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I have a problem with it topping out in the teens here. I'm okay with that. When it's 4 teams, I'm like, okay, this is where the regular season doesn't matter, because unless you're in maybe the top 6 in the last few weeks of the season, you're not getting in. You're not going to go from 11th to 3 in a month. It's just probably not going to happen.
The timing on this has been perfect, because I would argue that even during the 4-team playoff, the 4 teams were usually the best teams. This is the first year I've seen the parity, and I think I credit the transfer portal of this. There's from 1 to 10, there's a lot of parity right there.
Well, again, you look at what happened with Georgia and Texas. I mean, that was. And again, I know we're talking about a top 5 Georgia team. You're talking about a top Texas team. These are the kind of games we're signing up for now. And we're going to see these all up and down the schedule. You're going to see the Alabamas knocking off Georgia. You're going to see the Georgia going then and knocking off Texas. You're going to see Oregon and Ohio State games. this is the stuff where regular season games matter so much right now. And there's going to be this, you mentioned the parity. Again, go back and take a look at the Ohio State-Oregon game and how close that game was. And again, I know Ohio State's pretty upset about that game. Losing that game, it barely dropped them in the polls.
Yeah, you lose by 1 on the road to a team that was just ranked 1 below you. You should have dropped.
Now they lose again, all of a sudden it's going to get a little dicey. Although the only team I see beating Ohio State at this point is maybe Indiana.
Yeah, and we forget about Indiana, right? In that even if Indiana were to lose to Ohio State,
we keep not bringing them into the conversation, and maybe they should be.
Oh, and we haven't even brought up the Big 12 yet, where BYU at home beats Oklahoma State, needs a little bit of luck. Iowa State needed a little bit of luck in a last-minute drive to beat UCF.
By the way,
yes,
talk about a team and a coach having a bad year. Oklahoma State,
Mike Gundy,
yeah, that's rough.
And they may not be bowl eligible, which he's safe down there. I mean, he's an institution, but it shows you just how competitive this is going to be. And by the way, Colorado is getting better. Colorado went to Arizona yesterday.
They stomped Arizona.
Yeah, I can say, and this is hard for me to say, Deion Sanders is coaching better. And this team is playing better than they did a year ago. I'm comparing from year to year.
Okay, I thought you were going to. Well, it's tough to stomach it. And I don't know, maybe he's got this portal formula where he's like, you know what, it doesn't matter what I say. I'm going to drop all the comments in the world about Louis and luggage, whatever. And maybe, because maybe he does lose Shadur and Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. and some of these other guys. What if he finds another Shadur?
It's a big what if. You're talking about a really good or another Travis Hunter. I mean, Travis Hunter, all around, how Bud Crawford is the best pound for pound boxer in the country. Travis Hunter is probably the best
pound for pound football player in the country.
Yes.
And I get that, but what if he goes out through the portal and brings in another dozen guys and hits the nail on the head with 4 of them?
Might.
And all of a sudden there's a guy with another team that, I'm looking at Colorado right now and going like, holy shit. They're looking like this could be like an 8-4, 9-3 season. And God, that's kind of hard to stomach. It really is. But that being said, maybe he's got maybe this formula actually might work for him. But and let's not forget about Kansas State. Kansas State just kind of is back there too. They're doing the whole Chris Kleiman thing and just
they went to West Virginia and just
playing good solid
put
football.
A beat down. And the weird thing is, a team that could have played for a national championship last year, didn't get in the playoff. Florida State is horrible.
Wow.
And then you have Miami.
So bad.
Miami went to Louisville, got a win. Clemson keeps winning. I'm not sold on those 2 ACC teams for some reason. When I look at the 4 conferences, I think the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and then the ACC. I look at those 2 ACC teams and I'm like, I don't.
Of anybody out there, those are the ones that seem the most sketchy.
Yes.
And when you look at the conferences, I would fully expect, like in a playoff, I would expect the SEC teams to do well because, God, this year especially, that entire schedule for any of those SEC teams is just a brutal grind. I think the Big Ten across the board is maybe a little bit better than people are giving it credit. Obviously,
it's deep. It's deep.
And I think they run, I do think the Big Ten this year they are 100% running second fiddle to the SEC. I think the Big 12
I think it's a close second to the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think they're definitely better than the ACC.
I would agree with you.
And they're way deeper too. There's a lot of good, solid teams in the Big 12 right now. You rattled off several right there when you look at Colorado and Iowa State and Kansas State and BYU, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's not a bad conference.
No,
they actually have some solid teams.
You know, who would have thought a team like Iowa State would have won the realignment game? Because now with Texas and Oklahoma, and by the way, Oklahoma's bad. Oklahoma, it's going to take a long time for the Sooners to get back on track in the SEC. They might, you know how a lot of Nebraska fans said, let's get back to the Big 12 because the Big 10's harder than most people think. I think a lot of Oklahoma fans very shortly are going to go, can we go back to the Big 12, please? Because
it was a better fit.
No, it's a lot more money. I don't know if it's a better fit. It's a lot more money. But yeah, it is a fun time in college football. And you know what we've had each and every week? Great matchups. We've had great matchups each and every week.
I was kind of worried about how the whole conference realignment thing would shake out in terms of solid matchups.
We're getting them.
God, it's good.
Hey, if you're looking for Husker gear to wear to your next game, whether it be volleyball game, basketball game, even a football game, make sure to visit Husker Hounds and the Superstore at 84th and Center. There are 2 locations in the Omaha area, or you can shop online at huskerhounds.com. Scotty Strunk, who owns and operates Husker Hounds, one of the biggest fans you'll ever meet, and he's not afraid to display his red. You walk in at 84th and Center, because that's the store Rob and I go to all the time. It is wall-to-wall red, and anything you can imagine, anything you want for just everyday apparel, for game day apparel, for your yard, for your man cave, you name it, you can find it, and you will not be disappointed. So be a real Husker fan. Shop at Husker Hounds, 2 locations, Superstore at 84th and Center, and online at huskerhounds.com. And if you need legal representation, make sure to check out our good buddy Connor Orr. His law firm is expanding, offering more and more services. Connor will work with you specifically on litigation, on estate planning, or if you have some NIL needs, because he is a registered agent. He can kind of guide what companies can do with players and all sorts of things. Go to orlawgrp.com. That's orlawgrp. You can't miss him. He's an Irishman, man. He is a ginger get out, right? I mean, he's got the red hair, the red beard. You can't miss Connor Orr. I didn't ask you about this. I know about this. If you don't want to talk about it, tell me now. But you had a rough week. You had a rough week. It
was a little bit. We're gonna hold off on talking about that.
Okay.
We'll discuss this on a later.
Yeah. Podcast, Rob's got some news that we'll hold off to another time. But he had a rough week. So give some guys some thump. You just send him a tweet. Say, hey, thinking about you, Rob. Because it's all about the parents, right? It's all about.
Well, that and. Ladders.
Ladders.
We won't discuss the ladders either. So right. I haven't broken my ankle yet.
No, he hasn't broken his ankle. I'll give you a hint. Rob's like breaking into his house each and every day just to sleep at his house. But it's we can get into that a little bit later on. So Ohio State up next. Does Nebraska give up over 50 to Ohio State? Do they do that back to back?
I actually don't think they do. I think they're going to make some adjustments.
They give up 40.
It's going to be, I could see 40. It's going to be a tough game. It really is. Now,
do they score more than 21? You think Ohio State's going to put up 40? I guess how much do you think the Nebraska offense is going to put up?
Boy, that's a rough question, because I legitimately thought Nebraska would move the ball against Indiana's defense. And I said that based upon the fact that Northwestern moved the ball and scored points against them.
Gave them a good game.
Yeah. It's hard at this point. It's hard for me to judge, because until we see more consistency out of Nebraska, it's going to be hard to figure this one out. I mean, if you go back, so here's what's interesting. I'm looking at Nebraska's offense, and you look at the games they've played. They put up 28 against Colorado. I thought they should have put up more than that. 34 against Northern Iowa. Nebraska just didn't get the ball that many times against Northern Iowa.
I don't think Northern Iowa has played a better game than they did against Nebraska.
Agreed, 100%. Nebraska scored 24 against Illinois. They scored 28 against Purdue. That's their season high is 40 against UTEP, then 34 against Northern Iowa, and then 28 against Colorado, 28 against Purdue. They only scored 14 against Rutgers, 7 against Indiana. We're not talking about a high-scoring offense here.
True.
This is not a team that puts up 30 a game. They don't. I mean, 14 against Rutgers, 28. I mean, they couldn't crack 30 against Purdue. Purdue's not a good team. They're really bad. And to only do 7 against Indiana, that's a huge question mark, because again, you're sitting here looking at some of these special teams miscues that have you starting off your first offensive series of the game on the 1 yard line. You got to go 99 yards. That's going to really stymie an offense. If you're going to have 5 turnovers, that's going to slow your offense down a bit. So we haven't seen them be consistent in really anything. There's days where Dylan has looked like a world beater. There's days the wide receivers all look amazing. There's days where even the running game looks workmanlike.
But there's never been a day where it's all been put together.
And they haven't put it together consistently. I mean, it's the really good Nebraska teams, when you look at them historically, you get this consistent productivity. Whether it's a win or a loss, the productivity tends to be fairly consistent. And we have not seen consistent productivity out of this team.
Now, Nebraska is not going to beat Ohio State. Just wipe that out of your brain. They're not going to go to the horseshoe and win. And that, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But I was wrong about Indiana, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong about this. I mean, would you agree that there's no way Nebraska beats Ohio State?
Oh, I think everybody.
Yeah.
When everybody's like, what do you think? When everybody's doing their score schedule.
No, I'm not saying they can't.
All of us had Ohio State.
I'm not saying Nebraska can't make a game of it, because I do believe Nebraska can make a game of it. But you have to respond better than what you did against Indiana. You can't get smacked in the face and go, well, that's the game.
Well, and maybe the difference here is that with Ohio State, you're going to get smacked in the face when you go up against Ohio State. Part of me almost kind of wonders, was Nebraska not expecting to get smacked in the face?
I don't think it was. I think they thought they were on an even playing field with Indiana, and it wasn't an even playing field.
When all of a sudden they came out and get punched like they did, again, put them back on their heels, and they were playing catch up from the first play of the game.
All right, we got a lot of comments.
Ooh. One last thing. You can play the music. Okay. That's fine. So one comment I do have to add. So went up to the Augustana game yesterday. Watched him put a beat down on Winona State. That was great.
31-0.
Yeah, I watched some good football yesterday.
Did Ryan get in yesterday?
He did. Played a big chunk in the second half.
Nice.
So got in for multiple series. Did some really solid stuff. I was hanging out talking with a couple of the coaches after the game. And some of these guys watched the podcast.
Is that right?
So what I got from the Augustana coaching staff was a message to you.
Okay.
So do you remember the sweatshirt I wore last week?
Yeah, the bright yellow one.
So what they wanted me to tell you, it's not yellow.
What is it?
Augustana school colors are blue and gold.
Okay.
And the specific quote was, if you want yellow, go up to South Dakota State or go over to Iowa if you want a school that wears yellow.
Well, no, Iowa wears gold.
They wear gold in Sioux Falls.
There you go. And so that Viking right there, that's not yellow, that's gold?
That's gold.
Sure. You go ahead and convince yourself of that. It's yellow.
Iowa, yellow.
Owen, is that gold or is that yellow? Exactly. His look said it all.
Okay, let me ask you this. Iowa, is it gold or yellow?
It's yellow.
That's yellow.
It's yellow.
It's yellow.
Purdue is gold.
Purdue's gold.
Yes.
Notre Dame, gold.
Gold.
Colorado, gold.
Iowa State, when it does wear yellow,
it's orange.
Iowa State has
it's orange. That's
Iowa
orange.
State doesn't know what its school colors are, but because they wear all whites, they wear all blacks.
Iowa yellow. Pittsburgh Steelers. It's freaking yellow.
It is.
It's yellow.
100%.
And it's a good look.
Well, thanks for listening in
gold.
Sioux Falls. Thanks for watching in Sioux Falls. We like that. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit it right now. Subscribe. Also get the notifications. We're going to be back Wednesday with Behind the Point Spread with Scott Spreitzer. We'll take a look at one NFL game, 4 college football games from around the country. It's the Doc Talk Podcast.